Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Capital Week with David Owen. I'm Dirk Lammers of Cetera Services, along with David Owen, president of the South Dakota Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Throughout this session, we've been exploring some of the iconic parts of the South Dakota Capitol, which was built between 1905 and 1910 and is featured in the National Register of Historic Places. David, tell us about this week's setting for the show, a hallway that would be rather tough to call iconic.
Well, I tell you what, we've looked at the floor of the House from two different angles. The Senate last week was that beautiful barrel vault that's over the grand staircase. This week's background is a lot more pedestrian, literally. It's the hallway that goes from the rotunda on the third floor to behind the House of Representatives. Through this wall, you see, is the House chamber. On third floor, there's like a balcony that goes all the way around third floor, and you can look down to second floor. You can look up and see the dome of the rotunda. Then each the House and the Senate have a hallway on both sides. One is reserved for legislators. The other is allowed public use. So you can go to the offices that legislators have. There's a lobby down this hall to the right. A warning for everybody, these public hallways are infested with us lobbyists, and so you'll see legislators walking rather quickly. We're not a peril to the general public, but we are kind of a plague in the building.
You'll also see some journalists down that hall as they work their way to get to that little corner there. And if one of us journalists wanted to place a bet with one of you lobbyists on a sports game, we'd still not able to do that legally, but we got some bills working on that, don't we?
I was going to ask how you did on the Super Bowl, although I know your team did really well. I won't ask if you placed any wagers because I need you for the rest of the session. You being hauled off in cuffs would be a bad idea. Here's a quick update on this whole topic of sports betting in South Dakota. There's 3 bills in play. Senate Bill 44 is the governor's. This would restrict sports betting to the city of Deadwood and to actually being in a casino. That got through the Senate, so it's halfway done with the process. The vote on that was 32 ayes, 2 nays, and 1 excused. Everybody is supporting this bill. We absolutely need to have something pass, otherwise there will be no sports betting all year. So groups are pushing the governor's bill, so it's one of the alternatives. One of the other bills is House Bill 1211. This would allow betting in places that have a full liquor license, bars, restaurants, full menu, but all the bets would go through Deadwood. This is a similar arrangement that New Jersey has with Atlantic City. The chamber's backing this option. We firmly believe, as I stated in a previous podcast, that when people voted for sports betting, they wanted to bet on their teams easily and conveniently. The governor's threatened to veto it, so back to the comments about 44. The last one is House Bill 1231, and this would make it wide open. You can place bets using a smartphone, tablet, and as I keep joking, this is a bad bet. No one thinks that we're going to take this as a first step. So sports betting is advancing. Exactly how it will be done, we'll find out as the legislature goes on.
Now, this past election, the voters said, yes, we want recreational and medical marijuana. There are some bills going through the House. Might not happen as soon as some people were hoping for. Is that correct?
I still hear people completely in shock that the voters approved, especially recreational marijuana in South Dakota, but they did. Now, here's the update. Since we were here last week, the Circuit Court ruled that Amendment A, which was recreational marijuana, was unconstitutional. They ruled that on the grounds that it was more than one subject, and also that it was such an extensive rewrite of the Constitution, it was really a revision, not simply an amendment. And the Constitution itself, in Article 23, says that revisions have to start with a constitutional convention, which we've never had, short of the original one. That goes to the state Supreme Court over the next weeks and several months. that issue of constitutionality will not be resolved during this legislative session. So we really don't know how recreational marijuana is going to be treated. There is a bill that I do want to talk about. It's House Bill 1225. It deals with recreational marijuana, and it would let anyone with a malt liquor license serve as a place that you could purchase recreational marijuana. Malt liquor licenses are places that serve beer or sell beer for package and take home. Think convenience stores. There's about 2,400 of them in the state. This bill would only allow locally owned, South Dakota owned stores to be able to sell recreational marijuana. That cuts the number down to 1,000. This is the chamber board's worst nightmare. When we decide recreational marijuana is for sale, the chamber, out of concern for a workforce, would like that to be in limited, well-controlled environments. We are opposing House Bill 1225. There's one more. House Bill 1100 is the governor's request to the legislature to delay medical marijuana for a year. Right now, medical marijuana takes effect July of this year. This bill would put it off to July 1st, 2022.
There is another marijuana-related bill that we should probably talk about, SB 141, and this would expunge misdemeanor crimes related to marijuana. How is that faring in the legislature?
This is one of the more interesting issues that we're going to have to deal with as we embrace medical marijuana and perhaps allow recreational. Senate Bill 141 actually passed out of Senate Judiciary Committee, and this would tell everybody that had been convicted of a misdemeanor pot charge in the past, we will expunge that since it's a legal activity now. So it's clearing up some people from having criminal backgrounds when they were doing something that we've made legal. This is one of endless details that we're going to have to figure out. Other states have done it, but you just don't take something that's been illegal per se and make it legal without having to figure out you can't drive while you're smoking pot or doing gummy bears or under the influence. And in this case, we shouldn't continue to put a black cloud over somebody that was doing something that's now legal.
Moving on, we have HB 1242, which deals with workers' compensation. What's going on with this legislation, David?
This is one of those bills that kind of looks less volatile on the surface than it might be underneath. This is a workers' compensation bill that says caseworkers, medical providers, folks, the employers, as they're developing information and dealing with the case, have to share with the employee all of the records and information. Seems fair. And in fact, the Department of Labor and Regulation is not going to be involved in this case. We have a concern as employers. One of the steps you can get to when you're in a contentious workers' comp case is discovery. Which records do you have to provide? Because you're talking about records that can be beyond just the employee relationship. And some of those records judges will protect. And so we want to make sure that we don't end up giving information that would not be allowed otherwise because this law says we have to cough it up right away. The other complication is that for decades, we've taken workers' compensation issues and gone through a formal advisory board the governor appoints, known as, uncleverly enough, the Workers' Comp Advisory Council. This bill has not cleared that so that they can have that discussion. The chamber and other business groups will oppose the bill at this time, ask that it be sent over to that advisory council so we can vet exactly what's being done and honestly meet the legitimate concerns that might come out of cases that brought this bill forward.
We have a House joint resolution coming through this year, and this would call for a 60% vote on anything dealing with tax increases or spending of more than $10 million. How is this progressing?
There's two ways things get on the ballot. Through the signature process, initiatives, constitutional amendments, or the legislature can pass a joint resolution placing items on the ballot for voters to decide. The Joint Resolution 5003 would put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that would say two things. If there's a tax or a fee increase, you need 60%, or as the resolution says, 3/5 of a vote. So a simple majority could not increase taxes. This is being modeled after a previous ballot measure that forces the legislature to do a 2/3, which is 66% vote to increase fees or taxes as they deliberate. The other thing it will do is require that 60% vote if a ballot measure will spend more than $10 million in any year of the first 5 years of the ballot measure. What we saw this week is that they changed. The original resolution was going to have us vote on this in the June primary, where we have about half the participation we do in a general election. So they're moving it from the June primary to the general election in 2022. And they also added the legislature adding ballot measures to it. So it's slightly different. What voters need to think about, what citizens need to think about, is whether you want a super majority. I will tell you that only about 1 in 4 ballot measures has ever gotten more than 60%. And I don't think any of those dealt with taxes.
Okay, we have Senate Bill 124. This would treat churches the same as other businesses in regard to regulations. What's the story behind this bill, David?
Senate President Pro Tem Lee Schoenbeck was the sponsor of this, and he used as a prime example of what he's trying to make sure doesn't happen in South Dakota, a case in another state. And quite honestly, I don't remember if it was Nevada or New Jersey, but one of the states, as they went to a shutdown status because of COVID, started limiting businesses that could remain open. So their limits turned out to be 50% for casinos, and they took places of worship, churches, mosques, temples, and said no more than 50 people. So you end up with this really weird situation that if you have a casino that can hold 2,000 people, you can put 1,000 people in there betting. But if you have a church that holds 2,000 people, you can only let 50. That seemed a little out of balance and seemed a little wrong to Senator Schoenbeck. He made the case in front of the committee. All but one member agreed with him. I thought it was an interesting deal, and so I wanted to share it as part of our podcast, and we'll kind of watch it go through the session.
You touched on COVID there. We've now had more than a half dozen legislators who have tested positive for the virus. How are those cases going to affect the process moving forward?
Yeah, as we left Pier on Thursday, I think we had 4 or 5 legislators participating from their homes via internet links. We heard about 1 or 2 more as we were driving home. Last Friday, we heard about an additional one. You know, lobbyists and legislators know each other. You know, we're very friendly. We have respect for all of them, and so this number of people coming down with COVID is a concern. I will tell you, the vast majority of people in these halls have been wearing masks. We wear masks until we sit down at the witness table and actually testify. But you know, in that room, there are 70 people who wear masks unless they talk. So COVID has been front of mind. Some legislative sessions have delayed starting out of respect for this. And so I know the leadership is looking to see how far this goes. And at some point, you may see the legislature take a week off or pause for a few days if there's enough cases. I don't know what that number is. And what's more important is everybody's health. But this is a building with extremely thick walls. We have 500-600 people running around in here between employees, lobbyists, the public and 105 legislators. So we're all trying to be careful, but keep an eye on this.
Governor Kristi Noem did address a joint session of the legislature last week to talk about the budget, and give an update on that process. And a lot of this has to do with that one-time money. What new do you have for us on that?
It was a little bit like Mom sitting everybody down to talk about, we gave you an increase in allowance, but let's, not everybody's going nuts. Nobody knows for sure between the federal money and the federal money that covered costs that can be covered otherwise, how much one-time money there might be. The average is maybe $200 million. I heard one of the members of the Appropriation Committee say that there's at least $600 million in requests for the 200. Okay, that's human nature. But the governor took about 10 minutes to stand in front of a joint session and saying, look, she has three priorities for however much money there's going to be: savings, paying down debt, meeting obligations, and infrastructure. To give you an idea of the kind of money that we're talking about, she said they're certain that there's going to be $8.6 million at the end of the year on top of $61 million she talked about in her budget address and State of the State address. She's confident that there's going to be about $51 million more one-time money. She does have a specific proposal to take $25 million out of some of the federal money and reduce the $100 million for broadband, which is currently scheduled to be state money. She thinks she can combine that. So we'll put in $75 million, bring $25 million from the Fed over. But she is going to focus on one-time things like repairing dams, upgrading radio equipment. There's one thing I've learned being up here: you have all kinds of law enforcement, emergency folks, road service, and they all have their own kind of radio signals, and that gets chaotic, and her events complex. So a lot of communities have a lot of legitimate needs. God help the appropriators. That committee works 8 to 5 every day and then goes back in the evening sometimes. So that's one of the stories that we're going to follow with interest, and is a big deal for people back in their communities.
Virtual Business Day at the legislature is Wednesday. Want to get in a last-minute plug?
This is everybody's opportunity to get a in detail briefing on the issues of the day. We'll do a PowerPoint presentation. I'll go through an issue briefing, but we do our business caucus, and so everybody will be allowed, able to answer about 23 questions. We take the answers to that. We have nearly 100 people signed up. We'd love to have everybody sign in. That will be 1:30 to 2:30. We take the reactions of the business community in our business caucus and give it to all 105 legislators, the governor's staff, and the constitutional offices. Even if we don't like some of the answers, it's been a great exercise. We've been doing this for 14 or 15 years. Then the rest of the afternoon, we're going to hear from Governor Noem. We're going to hear from one of the governors at the Federal Reserve in Minneapolis, and we're going to hear from the U.S. Chamber. So an event that should be educational and fun. It's legislatively based, so the humor will be odd, but we'll try.
And that event is just $50, so register now. We'll put the link here and in the comments so you can get to it easily. And while you're clicking around, please give us a like and share to spread the word about Capitol Week with David Owen, which will be back Monday with another episode. Thank you.
Thank you.